Schneider speaking. So the first person I'm going to introduce is the newest challenger, because he hasn't spoken here before, Mr. Joseph Schneider. You're Romanian?
I'm American.
Well, I know that.
All right, good answer, good answer.
I meant, okay, sorry, it's a poor introduction, I just meant where you immigrated from. So I think it's wonderful, one of the great things that, I know I'm gonna sound like a liberal when I say it, but we have produced quite a diverse ticket, in both primaries and non-primaries. And I think that we're gonna give with either candidate, we're gonna give the incumbent a run for his money. So with that, Mr. Schneider, would you like to say a few words?
I'll go get next to the American flag.
Absolutely.
Wrap myself in the American flag, all this works. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, why I decided to run for Congress, and what I plan to do when I'm elected your representative. My name is Joseph Schneider. I go by Joe. I was born, as was intimated there, in Romania. I grew up under communism. I immigrated to the United States with my parents when I was 12 years old as a political refugee. A few weeks after I became a citizen, I entered West Point. Upon graduation, I served in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer, paratrooper, ranger, Green Beret. I then left active duty, served in the reserves for 8 years in a Special Forces unit, and I went to Harvard to go to the business school, and then after that to the Kennedy School of Government. Upon graduation, I became an entrepreneur, built a company, sold it to a division of General Motors. After serving 3 years in that position with General Motors, I then became I set up a strategy consulting practice in the areas of aerospace, defense, and security, working for corporations as well as for the U.S. government and DOD. I have one son that is also a West Point graduate, served in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne Division in Fallujah. Another son is a Air Force veteran. Another son left his professional career as a soccer player to work full-time on my campaign. My nephew is also a West Point graduate, a military doctor, served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, saving lots of lives, getting lots of awards for that. And in our family, we believe in public service as an obligation, not an occupation. The reason I decided to run for Congress is because of the dangerous trend that I see in American society today that reminds me very much of my youth when I lived under a totalitarian regime where if you said the wrong thing, you would disappear and get sent to a mental institution, because if you did not believe that you were in a worker's paradise, you could only be crazy. And if the hospitals were full, which often they were, or overfull, you went to the salt mines for re-education. So that was kind of a binary choice, neither of them quite good. And one of my uncles actually did go to the salt mines and came back after 3 years, a totally broken man, and never worked again. He was in his 30s when that happened. Never happened. Never had a good job. So I know what totalitarianism is, and when you look at American society today, and you see the hyperpolarization that we have in our political system, and the propaganda media that no longer presents facts, it only presents opinion and tries to incite divisiveness and the identity politics that we have in our society. This is the way bureaucracies control people. If the communists did something good, was inventing how they can control people with their bureaucracy and with their terrorism. And all the trends that we see in America are going more and more in that direction. And if you look at the results, the facts is that the average middle class in America has not seen a pay raise in over 30 years. Wages have been flat in America. If you look at the facts, 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. On the other hand, we are becoming far more an oligarchy, that the wealth is accumulating more and more at the top. 30 years ago, the top 10% of Americans own 35% of the wealth. Today, the top 1% of Americans own 40% of the wealth. It was the American dream. When my parents came here, the American dream was that if you work hard, your children would have a better future and more opportunity. For 23 generations, America has delivered on that promise. Ours is the first generation for which that promise is no longer true. If you look at the political system today, who does it work for? It works really well for special interests. It works really well for political parties and politicians. It works really well for government bureaucrats. If you look at special interests, the top 200 corporations that are politically active in America donated $5.8 billion to political causes. In return, they have received $4 trillion in tax benefits and government grants and things like that. That's a return on their investment of 750 times. So forget looking for the next Google or Amazon or Apple. Just invest in your local congressman and you will get a much better return for that investment. And that's what, corporations do. If you look at political parties, they have entrenched themselves. There hasn't been one major new political party. We have the Libertarians, but no one major new political party since 1854 when this party was formed. Why? Because they have entrenched themselves. Congress has an 11% approval rating. 11% when they take polls. But if you're a congressman, an incumbent congressman, you have a 95% chance of being reelected. Why is that disconnect? Because the system is rigged. It is rigged to perpetuate yourself. Last but not least, if you look at the government bureaucrats in Washington and its surrounding areas, 7 of the 10 richest counties in America are around Washington. What do they produce in Washington? Laws, regulations, and a system to skim off the top from the productive element of America. So the system is rigged. So who do we have in this district representing us? The Constitution gives us a right to have, this is a democracy, gives us a right to have a representative in Congress representing our interests. Our interests. Who do we have? We have Seth Moulton. Let me give you an example of how Seth Moulton is representing our interests. We had a tax cut bill. I'm all in favor of tax cuts because it's the private sector that creates wealth, not the government. Government takes the wealth and redistributes it. But someone has to create it first, and that's the private sector. So the more resources the private sector has, the better it is. However, during this tax bill, because it was passed by the Republicans, because the Democrats are resisting, the tax burden through all sorts of mechanisms shifted some of the tax burden from red states to blue states like Massachusetts and New York and California. So for many people in Massachusetts, they're not going to get the full benefit of the tax cut, and some people are even going to pay more money in taxes because of the way the tax system was. Where was Seth Moulton and the Democrats, the resistance Democrats, where were they when they were deciding how to divide the pie? They were resisting. Why? Because they believe that by resistance, they will be able to win the House in the next election cycle. So that's their objective. That's the calculus that they made. So if you're a Massachusetts resident and you will have to write a check next year to the government, that's your contribution to the Democratic Party strategy, because your representative was not representing your interest, he was representing the interests of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is going to decide what committee he gets on, how much money he's able to raise. Seth Moulton collects tens of thousands of dollars from all the major defense companies. Why? Because he's on Senate Armed Services Committee, and they give him $10,000 checks. boom, boom, boom. So of course he wants to be on the Senate Armed Services Committee because that's the biggest part of our budget. So if you're on the, the sewer committee, you're not going to make very much money, you're not going to get very many raises. So Seth Moulton is someone that has just been a major opportunist. He's gone to Iowa, he already considered, he hasn't done anything for this district, maybe name a post office or two, I'm not really quite sure, but he hasn't done anything substantive for this district, but or anything else in his life other than, I applaud his service, I served, my son served, other people served, that's fine. But beyond that, he hasn't done anything to prepare him for the presidency except his own vision of himself, that he's already presidential timber. So I think this district needs someone that is going to represent first, foremost, and always the best of this district. So what do I plan to do? First of all, my expertise is in problem solving. It's how I made my living for the last 40 years. Solving problems, identifying the root causes, finding solutions that deliver positive outcomes. That's what I intend to do. I will work with Republicans, I work with Democrats, I work with independents, if it's in the interest of the district, I'll work against them if it's not in the interest of this district. I would not have voted for this huge spending, the omnibus spending bill that is going to create a huge burden for our future generations, for my sons and my grandchildren. That is unconscionable. And the Republicans passed it with the Democrats, just like this. That someone should have voted. And there are people that oppose it. Republicans more so than Democrats, but there was opposition to that, but not enough opposition. So what I plan to do, I have a whole list of issues. You can go on. I have a website, joeschneiderforcongress.com. Discussing what I'm going to do, but I'll just summarize it. First, I'm going to fight for a smaller government. We have to take the cost out of the government. So, we need to have a smaller government. We need to have fiscal responsibility. And most importantly, we have to eliminate this permanent political class that is strangling the American people and is no longer serving our interests. And to do that, we have to institute things like term limits, so we no longer have professional politicians. Democracy, and it's only been tried 3 times in the whole history of humanity have we had democracy. The Greeks, the Romans, and us. And we never envisioned to have the Greeks didn't have it, the Greeks was rotational. You got 1 term. If you're in the middle of a war, and because they elected generals, and the general was doing okay, they extended his rule for 6 months, but that was about it. The Romans, the same thing. Democracy is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So term limits is essential to eliminate the permanent political class that just perpetuates this system that is going to choke us to death. And it's going to choke us, and we have to stop it, and we have to reverse it. And thank God we still have the Constitution, and thank God we still have democracy, where we can debate our ideas and let the stronger ideas come forward and let the people choose the government that they want. So if they want Seth Moulton and they want the slavery that is coming and that Dr. Lively spoke about, if that's what people want to vote themselves into, it's happened before. Rome, Greeks, all fell because of internal divisions and internal fights. The same sort of political climate that we see here today. The same sort of climate that is getting worse, not better. So we need to reverse it. We need to figure out how we can work together, because we Americans, whether we're left, we're right, we're Democrats, we're Republicans, which I think are old monikers now, but no matter where we are, we all want the same thing. We want safety, we want security, we want prosperity, we want to safeguard our families and make sure that our children have a better life. We all want the same thing. And we have different ideas how to get there, but our objectives are the same. So we've got to find ways to bring ourselves together to achieve those objectives. And that's not impossible. It's definitely doable. The Founding Fathers resolved slavery against free men, and they were able to find compromises. And that gave us the foundation for this great society that we benefit of today. So we can find compromises as well to take this great legacy we have and create a much better future and leave a great legacy for future generations. Thank you.
Do we have any
Yes, sir.
questions?
Joe, why aren't you running against Capuano? You're from Cambridge. Why did you leave district?
I have been in a citizen of Massachusetts since 1977. I have lived in many districts. I have lived in Dover, I have lived in Cambridge, I have lived in Boston, I have lived in Watertown. So I've lived all over the state. The reason I'm running in this district, I would say first and foremost, is because Seth Moulton is the epitome of what is wrong with Washington. You know, so
More than Capuano?
more than couple, yes, I definitely believe so. I definitely believe so. That's my judgment, and you know, I have strong ties to this district. My son has lived in this district for about 20 years or so. I was a board member here of a company for many years in this district. So, you know, I believe the values and the issues, whether you're in Capuano, in Western Massachusetts, on the Cape, in Boston, people have the same issues. And it's a question where you can make the most impact and have the greatest ability to promote these views. And I think if we take someone who the most prominent Democrat in the Massachusetts delegation, it's either Joe Kennedy or Seth Moulton. And Seth Moulton has really put himself out there. He's recruiting right now veterans to run as Democrat. He's probably the most prominent Democrat in the state. So I want to go for the toughest guy that we can have, because we need to make an example. It's more than just the issue of representation. It's getting a whole new revolution that Dr. Lively spoke about. There is a whole new revolution, whether it's in Europe, which I spend a lot of time in, or in America. There's a real crisis of governance. And unless the people step up, given the technology that we have today, Google knows more about you than you know about yourself. Google can tell you what you're going to do tomorrow. They know to the algorithm what your decision is. Imagine if government has the power to control that, and we're moving in those kind of directions. So unless we are able to reverse this trend, and the question is, how can you make the greatest impact to reverse the trend? And that's the kind of thinking I did in terms of why should I get involved at this stage of my life in political process. And the reason is because this is where I can make the greatest impact and leave something for future generations. And then I decided to do, I'm very systematic, I'm a trained military strategist, and the military have had more reason to be strategized. If you're a businessman and you make a bad decision, you go bankrupt. Not good, but you go bankrupt. If you're a military strategist and you get wrong, you come back on a shield. So you have a much higher, and then your wife and your children get sold into slavery. So military strategists have a much stronger incentive to think strategically. And I took that methodology and applied it to the business world, and I think I've been fairly successful thinking militarily and applying it to business problems. And we can do the same thing applying it to the political problems that we have today and having the greatest impact. And this district has the ability, as in Massachusetts has done before when we started the revolution, we have